God's timing is always perfect. Though we often struggle with waiting, wondering when our prayers will be answered, when our breakthrough will come, or when we will finally see the fulfillment of what we have longed for, we must remember that God is never late. He is never behind schedule, nor is he caught off guard by the circumstances of our lives. From the very beginning of creation, God set the universe in order with divine precision. And that same order governs his plans for us. Many times we feel as though we have been waiting forever. We cry out to God asking, "When, Lord? When will you answer? When will you move?" We see others stepping into their blessings, walking into their seasons of favor, and we wonder if we have been forgotten. But let me assure you today, God has not forgotten you. He has not turned his back on you. What seems like a delay is actually divine preparation. He is orchestrating things in ways you cannot see, aligning people, circumstances, and opportunities for the moment when everything will come together in his perfect will. Look at the life of Joseph. As a young man, he had dreams of greatness. He saw himself in a position of power, but instead of stepping into that promise immediately, he was sold into slavery by his own brothers. He was falsely accused and thrown into prison. Years passed, and it seemed as though his dreams had been buried. But God was at work. Every hardship, every moment of waiting was not wasted. God was refining Joseph, teaching him wisdom, strengthening his faith, and positioning him for the moment when he would be lifted up. And when the time came, Joseph was placed in charge of all of Egypt. What seemed like delay was actually preparation for destiny. My friend, the same is true for you. God's timing is perfect, and when he moves, nothing can stop him. He does not operate on human timetables. We may grow anxious, trying to rush the process, but God knows when the conditions are right. Just as a farmer does not harvest his crops before they are ripe, God does not bring forth his plans before they are ready. And more importantly, before we are ready. Have you ever considered that the reason for your waiting is not because God is slow, but because he is preparing you for what's ahead? Sometimes we think we are ready for the blessing, but God sees what we cannot. He knows that if he gives it too soon, we may not be able to carry it. He knows that if he opens the door too early, we may not have the strength, the wisdom, or the character to walk through it successfully. So in his mercy, he makes us wait, not to harm us, but to help us, not to frustrate us, but to prepare us. Think of David, anointed as king while still a shepherd boy. He did not take the throne immediately. Instead, he spent years in the wilderness, running from Saul, facing battles, and learning how to depend on God. By the time he finally sat on the throne, he was not just a man with a title. He was a man who had been forged in the fire of waiting, a man who knew how to trust in God completely, and so it is with you. The waiting has been hard. The nights have been long. The prayers have felt unanswered. But hear me today, your wait is not in vain. God has been working behind the scenes. He has been moving pieces into place. And when the moment comes, when his plan begins to unfold, it will be unstoppable. Look at how God fulfilled his greatest promise, the coming of Jesus Christ. For centuries, the people of Israel waited for the Messiah. Prophets spoke of him. Generations longed for him, but they had to wait. And at just the right time, when the world was ready, when everything had been aligned according to God's purpose, Jesus was born. Not a moment too soon, not a second too late. This is the God we serve, a God whose timing is never off, a God who is faithful to his promises, a God who is not slow but strategic. If he has made you wait, it is because he is setting things in order, and when he moves, it will happen quickly. The doors that were shut will fly open. The opportunities that seemed impossible will be right before you. The prayers you thought had been ignored will be answered in ways greater than you imagine. So do not grow weary. Do not lose heart. If you have been waiting, stand firm. Keep trusting. Keep believing. Because I declare to you today, your wait is over. God's plan is unfolding. And when he begins to move, nothing in heaven or on earth will be able to stop it. Waiting is one of the most difficult things we experience in life. It tests our patience, stretches our faith, and often leaves us wondering if God has heard our prayers. We live in a world that expects instant results, where waiting is seen as a delay, an inconvenience, or even a sign of failure. But in the kingdom of God, waiting is never wasted. It is not an empty pause, but a divine process of preparation. Throughout Scripture, we see that God often requires His people to wait before stepping into His promises. Abraham was given a promise that he would be the father of many nations. Yet years passed before Isaac was born. The Israelites wandered in the wilderness for 40 years before reaching the promised land. Even Jesus, the Son of God, waited 30 years before beginning His public ministry. Each of these seasons of waiting had a purpose. God was not absent. He was working, refining, and preparing them for what was to come. Many times we focus so much on the destination that we fail to see the value of the journey. We think that if God would just move faster, if He would just answer our prayers immediately, then everything would be better. But God is not only interested in giving us what we ask for, He is interested in shaping us into who He has called us to be. And that shaping happens in the waiting. When we wait on God, we learn to trust Him more deeply. We learn to let go of our own timelines, our own plans, and surrender to His will. It is in the waiting that our faith is tested, and it is in the testing that our faith is strengthened. A faith that has never been tested is a faith that cannot stand. But a faith that has endured seasons of waiting, a faith that has learned to rely on God even when nothing seems to be happening, is a faith that will withstand any storm. Think about a tree. Before it can grow tall and strong, it must first establish deep roots. If the roots are weak, the tree will not survive when the winds come. The same is true in our spiritual lives. If God gave us everything we wanted immediately, we might not have the strength or character to sustain it. But when He allows us to wait, He is giving us time to develop deep roots of faith, so that when His plan unfolds, we will be able to stand firm and not be shaken. Waiting also teaches us obedience. When God calls us to wait, He is asking us to trust His plan even when we do not understand it. It is easy to obey God when things are going well, when the doors are opening and when the blessings are flowing. But true obedience is tested in the waiting. Will we still trust Him when nothing seems to be happening? Will we still follow Him when the path ahead is unclear? Consider Noah. God told him to build an ark when there was no sign of rain. He spent years constructing it, enduring mockery and doubt from those around him. Yet he remained faithful. And when the time came, when the rain finally fell, Noah was ready. His obedience in the waiting led to his salvation and the salvation of his family. The same is true for us. When we choose to remain faithful in the waiting, we are positioning ourselves for what God is about to do. We may not see it now, but He is working behind the scenes, aligning things in ways we cannot imagine. And when the time comes, when His plan begins to unfold, we will realize that the waiting was never a delay, it was preparation. But here is the danger. If we lose faith in the waiting, if we become impatient and try to force things to happen in our own strength, we risk stepping outside of God's perfect will. We see this in the story of Abraham and Sarah. God promised them a son, but when the years passed and nothing happened, they took matters into their own hands. Sarah gave her servant Hagar to Abraham, and Ishmael was born. But this was not God's plan. The true promise was still to come through Isaac. Their impatience led to unnecessary struggle and conflict. How many times have we done the same? How many times have we tried to force things in our own strength only to find ourselves in a mess of our own making? If only we had trusted God's timing, if only we had believed that He was working even when we could not see it. So I urge you today, do not lose heart in the waiting. Do not let impatience drive you away from God's perfect plan. He has not forgotten you. He has not abandoned you. He is working in ways you cannot see, preparing you for the moment when His plan will unfold. And when that moment comes, you will understand why the waiting was necessary. You will see that every delay had a purpose, every closed door was leading you to the right one, and every unanswered prayer was making room for something greater. God is faithful. He always keeps His promises. If He has said it, He will do it. Your waiting is not in vain. Your faith is not wasted. Hold on, because when God moves, He moves suddenly, and when His plan unfolds, you will step into something greater than you ever imagined. When God begins to unveil His purpose, nothing can stop it. There is a divine moment when what seemed impossible becomes reality, when what was hidden is revealed, and when what was long awaited comes to pass. This is the nature of God's plan. It unfolds according to his perfect timing in ways that surpass human understanding. We may have prayed, waited, and wondered if he was ever going to move, but when his time arrives, everything changes in an instant. Throughout the Bible, we see moments when God's plan unfolded in ways that no one expected. Think of Moses standing before the Red Sea, with the Egyptians closing in behind him. To the natural eye, there was no way forward. It looked like the end, but God was not finished. His plan had been set in motion long before that moment, and at just the right time, the waters parted. What had once been an impossible barrier became the very path to deliverance. God's plans are always greater than our expectations. We may have an idea of how we think things should happen, but his ways are higher. When he moves, he does so with power, purpose, and precision. Consider the birth of Jesus Christ. The people of Israel were expecting a Messiah, a mighty ruler who would overthrow their oppressors and establish his kingdom. But God's plan unfolded in a way no one anticipated. Instead of a warrior king arriving in grandeur, the Savior of the world was born in a humble manger. Instead of defeating Rome with an army, he conquered sin and death through the cross. His plan was far greater than what anyone had imagined. It was not just about one nation's deliverance, but the redemption of all humanity. In the same way, when God's plan unfolds in your life, it may not look the way you expected. You may have prayed for one thing, but he is preparing something greater. You may have been waiting for a small door to open, but he is about to open something far beyond what you envisioned. This is why it is so important to trust him even when we do not fully understand. What seems like a detour is often a divine setup. What seems like a delay is actually preparation for something bigger. Think of Joseph, who was given a dream that one day he would rise to a position of great authority. But before that dream was fulfilled, he went through betrayal, slavery, and imprisonment. If Joseph had judged God's plan based on his circumstances, he would have assumed that the dream was never going to happen. But God was still working, even in the pit, even in the prison, even in the darkest moments. The plan was unfolding. And when the time was right, Joseph was lifted from the prison to the palace in a single day. That is how God moves, suddenly, powerfully, in ways we could not have orchestrated ourselves. The very things that seemed like setbacks become stepping stones to his purpose. The very struggles we thought would destroy us become the testimony of his faithfulness. And when his plan is revealed, we realize that not a single moment was wasted. Many of us are standing at the threshold of a divine unveiling. The waiting season has been long and the process has been difficult, but something is shifting. Doors that were closed are beginning to open. The prayers that seemed unanswered are about to be fulfilled. The breakthrough that felt delayed is arriving at the appointed time. And when it happens, there will be no doubt that it was the hand of God. But here is the key. When God's plan begins to unfold, we must be ready to step into it. Too often, people miss their moment because they are still clinging to the past. They are still holding on to doubt, fear, and hesitation. But when God moves, he calls us to move with him. We cannot afford to be paralyzed by uncertainty. We cannot afford to question what he has already confirmed. When he opens the door, we must walk through it in faith. Consider the Israelites when they finally reached the promised land. After years of wandering in the wilderness, the moment had arrived. But instead of rejoicing, many of them were afraid. They saw the giants in the land, and instead of trusting God, they hesitated. Because of their unbelief, an entire generation missed out on what God had prepared for them. Let that not be our story. When God moves, let us move with him. When he speaks, let us obey. When he calls us to step forward, let us do so with confidence, knowing that he has already gone before us. This is a season of unfolding. The things that have been hidden are about to be revealed. The promises that have felt distant are about to come to pass. The doors that have remained shut are about to swing wide open. What you have been praying for, believing for, and waiting for is about to be made manifest. And when it happens, give God the glory. Remember that it was not by your strength, not by your wisdom, but by his sovereign hand. What he is doing in your life is not just for you, it is for his purpose, for his kingdom, and for his glory. So get ready. Stay expectant. Because when God moves, nothing can stand in his way. His plan is unfolding, and no power in heaven or on earth can stop it. Now is the time to trust fully in God's plan and take action in faith. When we see His hand at work, we must walk in obedience and embrace the fulfillment of His promises. Too often, people hesitate when God moves. They have prayed, waited, and believed, but when the moment comes, they are filled with doubt, fear, or uncertainty. They wonder if they are truly ready, if they are strong enough, if they are worthy of stepping into the blessing. But when God's plan unfolds, it is not a time to hesitate. It is a time to move forward with boldness and trust. Faith is not just about believing in God's promises, it is about stepping into them. When Peter saw Jesus walking on water, he believed, but it was not until he stepped out of the boat that he experienced the miraculous. Had he stayed where it was safe, he never would have known what it was like to walk on water. The same is true for us. If we remain in a place of hesitation, we may miss what God is doing. We may find ourselves stuck in the past, clinging to old mindsets, old fears, or old ways of thinking, when God is calling us forward into something new. There comes a moment when we must act. We must take the step, make the move, walk through the door that God is opening. This does not mean that we will always have all the answers or see the full picture. It means we trust the one who does. Abraham did not know exactly where he was going when God called him to leave his homeland, but he went in faith. Time and time again, God has shown that when His people act in obedience, He moves in power. Yet so many of us hold back. We wait for the perfect conditions, the ideal circumstances, the moment when all fear is gone and every detail is clear. But faith does not work that way. Faith is stepping out even when things are uncertain. It is trusting that if God has opened the door, He will provide what is needed. When He says go, we must go. When He says speak, we must speak. When He says act, we must act. Some of you have been sensing that shift in your spirit. You know that God is calling you to something greater. You feel the stirring, the confirmation in your heart, yet fear tries to keep you in place. The enemy will always try to make you doubt. He will whisper that you are not ready, that you are not strong enough, that you are not capable. But God never calls us based on our own strength. He calls us based on His power. If He has placed something in your heart, He will equip you for it. If He has opened a door, He will give you the strength to walk through it. Look at Moses. When God called him to lead Israel out of Egypt, Moses immediately focused on his own limitations. He said, "Who am I that I should go?" He worried about his ability to speak, about whether the people would listen to him. But God did not choose Moses because of his eloquence or his strength. He chose him because of His own divine purpose. And despite Moses' initial fear, when he obeyed, he witnessed miracles beyond imagination. The same is true for us. We do not need to have all the answers. We simply need to say yes to God. We need to trust that if He is leading us, He will make a way. If He is calling us, He will provide what is needed. The time for waiting has passed. The time to move is now. But moving forward in God's plan does not just require faith, it requires full surrender. Too often we try to follow God while still holding on to our own plans, our own desires, our own control. But stepping into His purpose means letting go of what we think is best and trusting that His way is higher. It means laying down our fears, our pride, and our doubts, and fully embracing what He has in store. Surrender is not weakness. It is the greatest act of faith. It is saying, "God, I may not understand it all, but I trust You. I may not see the whole picture, but I know You are leading me. I may not feel ready, but I believe that You will equip me." And when we reach that place of surrender, we experience the fullness of His power. We stop striving in our own strength and start walking in His. Right now, God is moving. His plan is unfolding. Doors are opening, prayers are being answered, and the things He has spoken over your life are coming to pass. But the question is, will you step into it? Will you trust Him enough to move forward in faith? Will you lay aside your fears and embrace what He has prepared for you? Because when God moves, there is no turning back. The time of waiting is over. The season of delay has passed. This is the moment to step forward, to believe, to act in faith. Do not let fear hold you back. Do not let doubt rob you of what God is doing. Move forward, trust Him, and watch as His plan unfolds in ways greater than you ever imagined.